Hello everyone, it's me, Gavin, and welcome back to the Backlog Bunker. This week, we're going to talk for a little bit about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but not about the gameplay for once, actually about the story. As you may or may not remember from when I covered it on the bunker, I didn't like Final Fantasy VII, but I did really like its story, and I feel like it's one of the most important parts of the game to me, so when Rebirth kind of butchers it, I have a lot to say. Firstly, I am by no means the first person to complain about Barrett and Dine's confrontation in Rebirth, but I sure as shit don't have any qualms about chiming in on a story that I think the remake project is absolutely butchering. What I feel is the most important aspect of this is the fact that Dine killing himself was instead changed to Dine getting shot by a bunch of random Shinra troopers, spawned in from who knows where. Dine's perspective that he doesn't deserve to live or see Marlene because of what he's done is punctuated in the original by his decision to die. Having him express the same thought process just to get gunned down by random soldiers begs the question of what Dine was even planning on doing if there were no soldiers, or if the ones that were there had simply missed, or if Cloud and the gang had taken out these soldiers like they did the other ones. Which brings me to the other reason that the new Dine stuff sucks, which is that FF7 Rebirth has no idea how to let a moment last, either gameplay-wise or story-wise. You get a pretty tense boss fight followed by what's supposed to be an emotional scene, which then gets immediately followed up by a Palmer boss, because anytime the remake project doesn't know how to inject tension into a part of the game, they just bring in a big Shinra mech. It's such a good closer that we use it in a Rebirth exclusive Hojo boss just previously, and coming up in a Rebirth exclusive Scarlet boss. And even beyond that, instead of ending the chapter with either the Dine or the Palmer boss fight, you instead end it with an on-rail shooter minigame that's as long as it is boring. And speaking of that upcoming Scarlet boss, or at least what happens after it, I hate that we've reduced one of the most impactful parts of FF7's story, where Tifa helps Cloud come back to who he is, to Tifa sloshing around in a sensory deprivation tank to watch a bunch of cutscenes on her own. I consider the Cloud twist of FF7 to be one of the best and most important parts of that game's narrative. Of course, Rebirth has already ruined this in plenty of ways with Zack and the Sephiroth mind control, but I find Cloud and Tifa's conversation afterwards to be the worst example. Cloud questioning himself was supposed to be an emotional climax near the start of Disc 2 in Final Fantasy VII, but Rebirth is kinda setting Revelations up for failure by having it be such an explicit problem here. I obviously haven't gotten to Aerith's death yet, but I'm not thrilled about the prospect of Nomura and his team of frauds finding some way to ruin that one too, even despite the qualities allowed to them with Aerith's fantastic voice acting and portrayal so far. In other news, at the request of a friend, I started playing Metaphor Refantazio, and unfortunately, it seems that I've been tricked into playing Persona 5 yet again. Safe rooms, social links, social stats, and everything. I certainly like Metaphor so far, but I also liked Persona 5 at the beginning, so this doesn't really tell me much. It makes me feel like Atlas only has one story to tell, because archetypes are just Persona Awakenings. Academia is just the Velvet Room. Gallica is just Morgana. At the very least, she's more tolerable because she's much hotter than the cat, but it still doesn't stop the endless nagging. A lot of my following thoughts are ones I had when I played the demo like months ago, and I only feel the same about it now. It's very strange to me that games will insist on jumping into a story partway through, because this as you know bullshit is getting even more annoying in games than in movies or shows or books, especially when they flash back to it later anyway. There's a meaningful difference between Grius flashing back to when the prince got attacked, because that's a thing we don't really know about yet, and the game beginning with, hey, you know what our mission is, right? Yeah, save the prince. And then flashing back to, hey, we gotta save the prince. At that point, don't even bother with the as you know, or the you know why we're here, right? Just either start with the flashback, or do the flashback naturally at some later point in the story. I'm still fascinated by Atlas's obsession with making you choose dialogue options that don't change the dialogue that comes afterwards. In one specific case that I noticed, you're talking to Catherine, and your options are something like, that's deranged, or that's terrible, and when you select deranged, Will proceeds to say, that's awful. Not only did he not say what I selected, but he ended up saying something that was functionally identical to the option I didn't select. It's to the point where I wonder if picking the other option would have had Will say anything differently in the first place. And then one last miscellaneous thought, which is that these characters just never shut the fuck up. Stop telling me that items are useful when I pick up an item. If I have to hear Stroll say, if that's important, you better pick it up, one more time, I'm gonna turn all the voices off. Or play it in Japanese. Maybe then I'll learn something that isn't just, hey, items are useful. And then finally, in terms of gameplay, I played Rhythm Heaven Groove, and it was a little bit disappointing. Not disappointing enough to not buy, mind you. $40 is kind of unbeatable. Just not exactly what I wanted. Firstly, one of the biggest improvements ever made by Megamix is just not present at all here, which is that in Megamix, you could skip the minigame intro and just get straight into it. There's obviously the option to skip the practice while you're in the middle of it, but all the Rhythm Heavens have had that. Megamix was the only one that said, hey, if you're replaying this game, you don't need to see the intro title cut in every single time. If you just want to get into it and then immediately start playing the game, you can. On the other hand, something that we didn't get from Megamix that I'm actually glad about is that we completely nixed the story and the whole setup from Megamix. By far, the worst part of that game was the fact that every single part of the game had to be interacted with a cutscene or a character talking that can't just be a menu. To bring this back to FF7 Rebirth for a little bit, Rebirth and Megamix share the same problem in that things that could be accomplished with just a menu are done with characters instead. In Rebirth's case, it's Chadley, just everything to do with him. And so I'm glad at least that Rhythm Heaven Groove has completely nixed that part of the game. To get into the actual game part of the game, I think it's a decent first impression. I say that despite the fact that the very first game was one that I didn't like much. The song just wasn't very good, not memorable at all. I played it 3 times and I don't remember anything about it. I could not hum it to you. On the other hand though, Brawly Good Show is excellent and likely my favorite game from the demo. It has a great song and the repeat after me input is very interesting. My one big problem with it is that this is the game where it's easiest to see how the TV delay input can fuck you over. Not only is there no visual feedback for a miss, but oftentimes they shouldn't have even been a miss in the first place. At least you get a controller rumble when you get it right, but it's just not as good as Megamix's timing display. I'm honestly a little baffled we have to do the TV input thing at all, given that this wasn't really an issue with Fever. I would know, given that I just finished playing Fever on the exact same TV. Next up was Disc Dog, and it didn't give me a great first impression given that it's set up a lot like Exhibition Match from Fever, which is the worst game in the entire franchise maybe. Given that you spend at least half an hour in the game sitting around waiting for the next input. However, Disc Dog not only makes up for it by having a good song to go with it, but also just by having more inputs total. As a reminder, Exhibition Match only has 13, matched by the only other game that I would consider the worst in the entire franchise, so there you go. Feed the Beast is pretty simple all things considered, but it's greatly elevated by the fact that it has a really good vocal track. The downside is the track is only in Japanese. This is a step above Megamix, that either cut out the vocals for the English versions, or just had a really bad English version in the case of one song. But it's a step below Fever, which not only had English versions of all the vocal tracks, but they were also really good. And finally, Remix 1. It's fine, gameplay-wise, but it kinda has nothing on Remix 1 from Fever, because not only is Fever's first remix themed both visually and musically, it's just a better combination of those games. Grooves is good, but the cuts between games don't really feel all that natural. Overall, it's a better starting lineup than Megamix and DS, and about on par with Tengoku, but Fever absolutely blows this one out of the water when it comes to first impressions. And given that this is 8 years after Megamix's release, I kind of expected a little bit more, you know? And finally, our weekly topic, which is GTA 6 being a $100 video game with an $80 compromise version. I actually think that GTA 6 pricing is very nuanced and requires a lengthy and in-depth discussion of both pricing and game industry.